Today, I have with me Doug Fifer. Doug, you are a retired police officer from Alaska, and you just wrote a book called 50 Shades of True Crime: Sex, Drugs, and Killer Kink. Man, that's a killer title. So, can you tell me a little bit first? Tell me a little bit about yourself and your career, starting with, like maybe where did you grow up? Where did you have your law enforcement career? How long your law enforcement career was? And then we'll get into the book.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Ricky. And certainly, I'll give you some background on myself. I was born in Homer, Alaska. And for your listeners that don't know, Alaska it's a giant state. If you put it on the U.S., it covers about a third to a fourth of the U.S., just one state. Homer has about 5,000 residents, so really small coastal town. I moved to Anchorage, which is our largest city in the state. About 320,000 is our population. And in 1996, I was hired by the Anchorage Police Department, and I started my law enforcement career. I did 25 years of service. That's our retirement number. And in that time, I really worked everything. I mean, if you can think about law enforcement in any capacity, I probably worked it. I like working different units, cross training, make myself a better officer, whether it was hostage negotiation, crime scene, response team, anything and everything I worked. Loved every second of it. There's no greater profession in the world. It's exciting. It changes constantly. So then I retired in 2021 after 25 years in Alaska, which I loved every minute of it. I'd go back and do it again if I could. And that's really where the book was born after that.
Hell yeah, man. As I was researching your book, as I briefly discussed it as we were getting on camera here, as I was researching you and your book, it really is a different take on true crime and your experiences over your long illustrious career, and a little bit of Alaska itself, about Alaska. And a lot of people, a lot of criminals think that they can go just hide out in Alaska and they're going to be all right. And you're here to tell us that's not entirely accurate.
Yeah, definitely it's not the case. You know, our motto in Alaska is North to the Future. Everybody thinks it's wild and independent, and it is. There's a lot of independent thinking in Alaska. Low population for that big of a state, about 700,000. So I think some of the criminals think that they can come to Alaska and get away with it because you have such a vast territory. Unfortunately, we have the highest per capita serial killers anywhere on the planet. That's population based, but a lot of, it's one of the most beautiful places on earth, but also one of the most dangerous. I tell people a lot of crime. We have very professional police forces in Alaska. So ultimately, those perpetrators are caught no matter what the crime they commit. But I think that's a little bit of it. They think they can get away with it because we're so scattered in population. There's a lot of land mass. So if you're killing people, you can hide bodies. So a lot of that they think, but in the end, we catch them all.
So, what do you think contributes more to serial killer per capita? That kind of thing. What do you think contributes more? Is it the fact that it's wide open and the isolation, or do you think it's more drugs, alcohol, and let's say like we're all just products of our environment? Do you think that's it, or more drugs and alcohol and the mental side of things?
Two things. So you got a bunch of great points there. So I'll kind of hash them out differently. I don't want to say normal crime, but regular crime, setting serial killers aside, drugs, alcohol, depression, long winters, dark nights, mental illness, that all contributes to that. So absolutely, Alaska's unique. You have 8 months of winter. Anchorage is a little bit better, but if you look at Ukqiavik, which is one of our northernmost towns, the sun literally sets in November and it doesn't rise till late January. So you have darkness for 2 months straight. Uh, Anchorage is a little better on, summer solstice in the summer, we get 22 hours of light. So it's light all summer. But then in the winter, you're going to be lucky to get 4 or 5 hours of light. So I think mentally that taxes people on those type of crimes. Serial killers are unique individuals on their own. Typically, in my experience, highly intelligent, organized, plan everything out. So I think Alaska, most of our serial killers come to Alaska. They're not born in Alaska. We have a few, but most of them come to Alaska because I think they can pick their victims. They think they can dispose of bodies. I think that contributes why we're different, but most of them are from somewhere else that come to Alaska and continue on their serial killing, thinking that they're going to get away with it because you have smaller police departments because of a lower population. And again, that wide open territory to dispose of bodies.
That's interesting, man. That's a very not how I would expect it. That's not the answer I really expected, that a lot of people from the lower 48 go to Alaska not just to maybe be more free in the type of crimes that they're able to do, but like, well, serial killers, they think that Alaska is just their playground, huh?
Exactly. That's, I think, and I've interviewed a few. I have one case that I actually negotiated with the serial killer. So you get a lot of information post, and we ask them those questions because as law enforcement, we want to know. I mean, what makes this individual tick? Why do they do what they do? It's very important. That helps us solve future cases. So we get down and deep and dirty with these serial killers because I want to know every piece of information they have as to why they're committing the crimes. And in those conversations, you get about 50% truth and 50% lies. And as a good investigator, you have to kind of mediate what's real and what's not. So you never get the full truth, but you get enough where you can kind of put the pieces together.
Yeah, and so in my line of work, I'm a stay-at-home dad. In my line of work, I always take a two-sided approach to when handling my kids. Most of the time when I'm asking them a question, I already know the answer. But I always say, there's his side, her side, somewhere in the middle, there's the truth. And that truth is what we're after. So you got to sort through all the layers of bullshit to get
Yep.
to the truth at the end. And that's something similar to what you're talking about. And you had mentioned a hostage negotiator at one point, right?
Yep. Correct.
That's that's impressive. That's a really impressive skill that you got to develop over time, and to be able to talk people down, and not necessarily down, but just talk them out of doing something negative that might hurt themselves or other people. That's a really impressive talent, because not a lot of people, like, there's a reason why they have a hostage negotiator, and it's not just everyday cops that handle those things. So how did being a hostage negotiator aid you in writing the book?
Yeah, I'll talk about that real quick on your kids because I'm a father too. When you're asking your kids a question, and this is the same with criminals on interrogations, is when you ask a question and that individual, whether it's a kid or an adult, repeats that question back to you, that's it. They're lying already. So
Yeah.
you already know that from being a dad. It's no different in law enforcement. When I ask these criminal suspects questions and they repeat it back, in their mind, they're thinking over an answer to kind of save themselves. But I found that it's almost foolproof in my career. And it doesn't matter if you're a burglar, a robber, or a serial killer, it's all the same. So,
Another good one is, what do you mean?
yep,
What
exactly.
do you,
Yeah.
what do you mean? What do I mean? That's a stall tactic, very common stall tactic.
As far as a hostage negotiator, early on in my career, like I said, I like to transition and try different things. That's one area where I naturally was good at being a hostage negotiator. It just came second nature to me. And when you're kind of naturally good at something, you kind of gravitate towards it and you become better and better. So early on in my career, I became a hostage negotiator. I ran our team and we had a 5-member team. And what that does is any big incident we'd respond to. For your listeners, we have a primary negotiator. That's the one that will actively talk to that suspect in crisis. You have a secondary negotiator. That negotiator listens in on the conversation, writes notes or types computer messages to the primary in case that primary is missing something because you're involved in that conversation. You're not catching everything. We have a tertiary negotiator, a third negotiator, which is called an intel negotiator. They're off on social media, contacting your former employees, political parties, whatever you do in life, I want to know as a negotiator. If you drink Coke over Pepsi, I want to know it. It's that important that we have all the information because it's a chess match with that individual. And then you have a team leader on your, which would often be myself. That would be the liaison with the command staff. Because remember, the police departments, they want to go in with a SWAT team, bust down doors and take people or place them under arrest. We want to get time so we can talk them out safely, so officers are safe and they're safe. So it's always that push and pull with them. But there was no greater reward in my career than being a negotiator. I love that mental combat with individuals because it was my job to kind of play chess with them, get them out safely, no matter what they've done, including murder. We're very honest as negotiators. That seems counterintuitive, but suspects in crisis, and especially even serial killers I've negotiated with, they know they're going to go to jail. They've killed multiple people. It's not a surprise. If you lie to them and they have hostages, they might as well kill again because they have nothing to lose. So I would tell them, I may not say you're going to go to prison for life, but I would tell them that you're going to have to answer for your crimes. And what happens in the courts is up to the courts. And they would respect that answer because they know they're going to jail. If you told them, nope, we could probably work this out, you won't go to jail, they know you're lying. That's going to break down rapport. And then one of those innocent victims could be killed. So, fortunately, it's extremely rare that negotiators had lost hostages and things like that in my career. I can only think of one instance where that happened. Sometimes you can't prevent it despite all the good that you do in those conversations, but mostly it's a very effective tool. The greatest tool a cop has is their mouth. We've got batons, pepper sprays, guns, all that. And when necessary, you got to use it, but really your mouth can get you out of 99.9% of the conflicts.
And that's especially important in Alaska because you guys are outnumbered up there. So, I mean, police officers down here in the lower 48, they're really outnumbered here too, but like there's a lot of land up there to cover. And I talk to people all the time and tell people about my little city here. It's 40 square miles, give or take. That's the official number, 40 square miles, but 75,000 is the population, give or take.
Okay.
So we have at any given time 75 officers spread out over all three shifts. And that's a lot of land to cover. That's not even two officers per square mile. And that's where we come up into a lot of difficulties with dispatch. Here in the last few years, dispatch hasn't been able to get to or not violent crimes, but property crimes. So they tell us, hey, you've got to make a report online and we'll take care of it from there. Most of the time, it's just going to be an insurance thing. There's not much we can do about property crime these days. And they're open and honest about it. But what they really need is funding for more officers. And we don't have those type of crimes where I live. I mean, there was, the uh, run of the mill crimes here, just regular crimes. We do have violent crimes, a lot of domestics here in Missouri, but rare occasions we have the murder here or there. But you've come across some really weird shit in your career, and you put a lot of that stuff in the book, right?
I do. And what I did is, as a true crime writer, former cop that did 25 years, I saw it all. So I could write about homicides, serial killers, robberies, and those are all great cases. But really, I wanted to establish myself being a little different as a true crime author. You can go out and you can find 10,000 books on true crime right now. This book, 50 Shades of True Crime, with the real sexual deviant crimes, you can't find any. It's
Yeah,
you,
there's nothing out there like this, brother. There's nothing out there. I mean, if there's one or two out there, I didn't find them while I was researching. And that was 50 Shades of True Crime. It's a play on the 50 Shades of Grey series. So automatically with that title, we already know what the book's about. And that's brilliant, brother. I really like that. So let's dive in without giving away too much of the book because I do want my listeners to reach out and grab this book for sure because I mean it's gonna be a good one. I'm waiting on it to get here as myself. So um getting into the book without giving away too much, what is one of the cases that really stands out for you in your that is in your book that you are willing to talk about and share?
yeah, one of the most interesting cases, and especially as a seasoned cop, it still shocked me. It's in a chapter called Kink and Ink. And your listeners that, it's where tattoos and law enforcement kind of cross paths a little bit. But Alaska, not unlike the rest of the nation, has a rampant drug problem. And there was a drug peddler working a notorious street corner in Anchorage that I wanted to arrest. He was blatant. He was out there selling heroin. A little bit offensive to me as a police officer. So I thought I would do my duty and, arrest him and kind of put the quash on drugs. I didn't realize that that's nearly impossible. You're a little naive when you first start on the power of narcotics. But he was out there selling it, and so I snuck up on him and I watched, and he made this deal with a car. So I chased after him, tackled him. But back in the day, they would keep heroin in their mouth, wrapped in aluminum foil packets, and that way they would swallow it when they were, arrested by law enforcement. We had to have the drugs in possession to charge. So if they swallowed it, you're kind of out of luck. Uh, but in the melee, I had to pepper spray him because he was actively fighting me. And what that did is it made him throw up because pepper sprays, your eyes, your nose, makes you nauseous. But he threw up and he threw up these glistening heroin packets and wrapped in aluminum foil. And for your listeners, acid in the stomach doesn't dissolve aluminum. And also, if they wait long term and they go to jail and they check out, even when you pass it the other
Yeah,
way, it
it'll
doesn't.
go all the way through.
It'll go all the way through. So they keep their heroin, wash it off, and back to selling it. So it's an odd profession and always fascinated me. But I tackled him. He threw these heroin bundles up. I was able to make the arrest. I was taking him to jail. He was a younger kid, early 20s. And questions on our reports are, what kind of tattoos do you have? It's a basic question. We document them for identification purposes. FBI does it, law enforcement. That way, if we find you later and you lie to us, we can match these tattoos and identify you. So he said he had a prison tat of a woman on his back. At the time, I didn't know what that meant. So I said, okay, describe it. He said, it's a prison tat of a woman. I said, is it your mom, your girlfriend? I don't know what the hell he's talking about. He said, you don't know what a prison tat is? So I said, no, at that time. Well, all the way to the jail, he said it was tattooed on him. It's a beautiful picture of a woman, breasts, vagina, everything. And that way he was serving time in San Quentin. The Mexican mafia had grabbed a hold of him and they
I
run,
think I know where you're going with this,
yeah,
brother.
they actually run prison brothels out of San Quentin. Now, I didn't
Oh,
believe this. I was like, there's no way in hell, right? But I was fascinated pulling up to the jail because he's saying about this prison tat. So we went into the jail, and correction officers in Alaska have a little more power for searching than police officers. Once you're incarcerated, carte blanche, they do whatever they want. So I told the jailer, he won't tell me, describe the tattoo, but I got to put it on my report. So I need to see it. So he told this guy, strip your clothes off. And in jail, you don't fight correction officers because it's going to be a problem. So the guy, he'd been there before, he stripped right down. And I'm looking at the backside of a man, and it really changed the trajectory of my life and my thought process as a police officer. I didn't realize how low individuals can go, especially with drug habits. But it was one of the most unique and beautiful tattoos I'd ever seen in my life. It looked just like a woman. So that shocked me. So I interviewed this, I say young kid because he's in his 20s afterwards. So he got onto heroin at age 15, started stealing from his parents. They kicked him out. He didn't finish high school. He got arrested 3 or 4 times, started selling dope for his habit, admitting to doing some unsavory acts on the side to keep his heroin habit. Got a rather lengthy sentence in San Quentin. The Mexican mafia freely gave him heroin. When he couldn't pay, he had two choices. They would kill him or they tattoo him and he would be a prison prostitute. Absolutely fascinating. I document this story from kind of A to Z. You can actually see the taboo tattoo in the book. So readers beware. But this is shocking on how low, and I kind of make the correlation on how powerful drugs are. Because you think you have a bad day at work, you think your life's, something's wrong with your life. You have no idea what this guy in his early 20s has gone through. I don't know whatever happened to him post that, but I'll always remember that tattoo. And so from that day forward, I realized the power of narcotics and and how unstoppable it is in society. It still is today. But that's one of the unique stories that really shocked me as a younger cop, and changed, my thought process moving forward on humanity and what people will do.
yeah, that's wow. I can't. Wow, that's wild. That is, like you said, that is a change to see that firsthand, and then have that light bulb moment where you're like, oh shit, I know why that tattoo's there, and it's like, and then you think about the guy, and you're like, man, what the hell happened in your life where this is now acceptable to you? And you've, man, it's heroin, and then I don't understand that type of thing. I do understand. I empathize. Let me say I empathize. I don't understand fully, because I couldn't see myself going to that extreme. Now I've had addiction issues, so like with Oxycontin. It was prescribed to me, and as I was taking them, I noticed that I was starting to take a little bit more than what was prescribed. And over the course of 3 months, I had decided, I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I'm out of medicine, and I now have to go talk to the doctor. and get more medicine. I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed. So what I did was I went to go talk to the doctor and I got a weaning prescription. And now this is extremely illegal, but I took that prescription, I sold that prescription, and I bought a bag of weed. And I to this day, I still have addiction issues with cannabis. And I I like to say it's like a replacement addiction. And I was just trading one addiction for the other for real. But so I do empathize with how it got that bad, but I could never see myself going to that extreme to get a high. You know what I'm saying?
It's no, I empathize too. And actually, I related it in the book, but after the interview, and he freely gave me all this information. You're not required to tell me about your life history as a suspect with the drug bust, but he did, and we walked through it. I was fascinated, but I really thought he needed a stint in rehab rather than jail. I mean, I actually felt sorry for the kid. I mean, what circumstances to bring you all the way there? But one thing he mentioned to me when I said, "How could this happen? How could you not stop?" He said he would take death over not having heroin. So once you get to that point, most of society's thinking normally you'd never do that. But once you get into that spot where you're going to take death if you didn't have heroin, you're pretty much going to do everything, right? So
Yeah.
it's brutal. I don't know what happened to him in the future. Hopefully he cleaned up and turned his life around. It's a vicious drug. You talk about oxys, there's fentanyl, there's weed, there's cocaine, all over the spectrum. Heroin is the single most destructive narcotic I've ever seen in my career. It was always there from day one and right there at the end. Other drugs like oxys and fentanyl, they'll ebb and flow. Heroin stays true through time.
That's that's kind of crazy though. When you think about it. So other than that case and outside of the book, what are some of the most maybe not shocking, but you could use heartbreaking or what are some of the cases that really stuck with you or a case in particular that stuck with you that necessarily didn't have a happy ending but you'll always remember and not necessarily life changing but just something that just really stuck with you. Do you have one of those?
Sure, I probably have a couple. One, and I think this is true for all law enforcement and probably people, no matter, is children. Any crimes or deaths involving children, which law enforcement has to go to, those always gave me problems. I always remembered them. It was hard. I have children myself, so it was hard to take. Probably every child murder I can remember like it was yesterday, sadly. So those are the most heavy on your mind. So that's the hardest. As far as a case that wasn't solved that always stays with me is we had probably a serial killer, but I worked two crime scene response call outs, found corpses of bodies in our waterways. And when I mean a corpse of a body, I'm just talking about the torso. The head's gone, the arm's gone, the legs are gone. Uh, Tool marks on the bones. Uh, so homicides. So there was two of those we found. Now, Alaska waterways are tough with our tides, our inlet, I mean, it's some of the bodies you throw in there, you're never going to find. So that case always fascinated me. We never solved it. I don't know where this individual went, but somebody that hacks up bodies doesn't stop. I can promise you that. They could have left state. They could have died. They could have been incarcerated for another crime. I don't know, but that case always weighs on me because that's a sadistic individual that we could never put two and two together to find him or her or whoever it was. But I do always remember that case because that individual could still be out there committing homicides.
That is crazy to think about. And man, what's crazy to think about for me as a civilian, never been in law enforcement. Now, I've been on the other side of law enforcement a few times, but um, what strikes me is like you have to physically cut. I mean, you have to be conscious when you're doing that. And you have to understand, well, I mean, obviously they're dehumanizing the person that they're doing it to, but like that's a person. That was at one time a dude or a lady, or a child in some cases. That that is absolutely insane to me to think about like having to do something like that. And it reminds it reminds me of a few movies that I used to see like when I was a kid. I can't remember specific names at this point, but like serial killer movies where they chop the bodies up. That's one of the discussions that's always happened in one of those in those movies that to do something like that, you really have to be a different kind of human being. And you would like to think that sometimes that if we had to be forced to do these things that we absolutely could, but it's so mind bending when you'd have to do something like that. Doctors sometimes get freaked out doing it.
Yep. No, I think in serial killers, again, they're sociopaths. They have zero empathy. So one of the serial killers, his name's Joshua Wade, that was arrested. He was in Alaska. He could literally kill a female. He could have sex post-mortem with the body, necrophilia, and then go get a hamburger from McDonald's and eat it without skipping a beat. So these individuals are very sadistic. They don't operate like you and I. There's obviously something wrong with their brains. There's a brain disease. The wires aren't connected right. I'm not an expert in that. I don't know what it is, but these individuals day to day don't operate like us. We'll never be able to understand their lack of empathy. So sawing off a leg, as hard as it is to think about for you and I, it's not even a thought in their mind. It doesn't even affect them. And I'm being very honest when I say that. Interviewing these, you're speaking to the devil themselves. You're not speaking to humans.
Yeah, I've seen some. They've got on Netflix. They've got a few interview with serial killer Ted Bundy tapes, those kind of things. And it is always shocking to hear like the lack of empathy or the lack of feeling at all, really, when they're talking about their cases and their victims. And sometimes you'll see that glimmer of excitement when they're talking about it, especially Ted Bundy. That was something that I saw that not a lot of people probably did, but like when he was speaking of his victims, he'd maybe raise his eyebrows a little bit, and that would indicate a little bit of excitement. And I'm just like, wow, that's incredible. Like that all years later, he could still feel this way about the crimes that he committed. And that's something very common in serial killers. They often think about the crimes that they've committed over and over and over again. And it excites them. And part of the reason why they go out and do it again.
Yeah, you're spot on with that. What I'll tell you is, I reference this in the book that sex isn't about sex. I know it's very physical, it's biological for us. Sex is about power. So these serial killers, they feed off that. That's why even Ted Bundy had post-mortem sex with his victims, necrophilia. They feed off that power. It's about domination. It is about the act. I mean, it's physical, of course, but really it's about that power mentally for them, and they feed off that, and that's what excites them. That's why you'll see that twinkle in their eyes. When you negotiate with a serial killer, you can feel that excitement when they talk about their crimes. They're very proud of it, and it seems counterintuitive for us to compliment them on their crimes, but in that active interrogation negotiation, you do because you get more and more evidence. They want to talk freely about how well they did this killing, the steps they took. They're obviously sorry for getting caught, but they want to give it to you. So law enforcement, it seemed kind of weird, but if you were to listen to my interrogations, you would often hear me compliment an individual on how well they were organized and what they did. It's not because I didn't have empathy for the victim, but I needed those details to convict that individual, to document that what they did. And that was the best way to get them from A to B, and telling me, and really worked all the time. People like their ego stroked, just human nature. Serial killers are no different.
Yeah, and a lot of them actually know what's happening as because some of them understand a little bit of psychology and stuff like that. So they do understand sometimes what's happening but they just can't help themselves, you know?
Yeah.
And it's when you see that little twinkle, it reminds me of a wolf, when a wolf's going after its prey, that little twinkle, it's crazy to really think about like all of us human beings at our very core, we're all just animals. And so it really is that easy to figure people out sometimes. And like you said, people like that's how easy this job is because people love talking about themselves. And so sometimes if I'm having a bad interview, I'll just remember like ask them a question about themselves, ask them a personal question because even me, I love talking about myself. So it's it's one of those things where you do have to understand that going into an interrogation, and then use that those tools in your toolkit, if you will, and just open up that dialogue. And once you have that dialogue established, there's a relationship, there's a rapport, and they'll keep talking. And that's something we've seen time and time and time again, just by, remembering little details, like people love talking about themselves. So let's just go in here and let's talk about this guy. So that's fascinating, man. So let me ask you, in writing the book, was it difficult to was it difficult mentally to kind of go through some of these cases and relive them in your from your point of view? Was it difficult, like PTSD wise? Not, maybe not active PTSD, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think that I was a little unique as a cop, meaning I could go to work and do 10, 12, 15 hours, whatever it was, and kind of shut that off and go home and be with family and have a normal life. I really focused and made sure I did that. Otherwise, you're gonna go a little loony yourself. Uh, working the crime scene response team, that's responding to homicides constantly. I make the reference in the book that after doing that team for many years, all I saw was dead people. Like that's not fun for you to go on a job. So it is. So you have to mentally take care of yourself, which I did. So I think I was unique. I think officers that survive a career like that have a unique ability to kind of turn it off, go home. When you're at work, do your job, make sure you're focused, but kind of shut that off. So writing the book was okay for me. I wrote it in 3 months post-retirement, piece of cake. All I worked 80% of the cases are mine. I do reference some other cases on training in the lower 48 that are really sick and deviant that I had to put in there, but a lot of them are Alaska. Don't be afraid to come to Alaska after you read the book. Some of your readers might and listeners, but it's unique. So what I did is I wrote the book and then I thought this will be easy. I'll take it to a publisher. We'll get this out to mainstream America. They can learn about law enforcement in Alaska. Well, I was turned down by six consecutive publishers, bigs, because the book is savage in its content. It's the real deal from a cop's perspective. So, I mean, it's no fluff. It's just straight into it. So what happened, happened, and your readers are going to get that. It was a little shocking for some of these publishers. Eventually, I found one before giving up that said, love the book. Let's get it out there. It debuted July 16th. It's been extremely popular, which is good. Really, the sweet spot is women, 35 to 60. And in my experience, this holds true because when I would talk about these stories at dinner parties or whatever in my career, women would always ask more questions than men, and they would dig deep into the details, no matter how sexually graphic these crimes were. And I was like, wow, that's a little shocking to me, but it held true. So the book, it starts off kind of like a fun chapter. It's called Name That Crime. And what I do is I take some Alaska cases. They're all sexual deviants in nature, but the reader will see a booking photo or a picture of a crime scene. They'll get 3 Alaska statutes on criminal behavior, and you'll kind of pick based on, you have to profile that individual, kind of pick what the crime is. Then you'll read the story and see how close you get. So you get to kind of play cop and profiler in the first chapter. It's a warm-up chapter. Then we get into some serious kink moving forward. One of my favorite chapters is called The Last Climax. That chapter is mainly autoerotic asphyxiation and similar crimes like that, but nobody survives that chapter, meaning that they all die. Most of it's accidental, but fascinating what extent individuals will go to for sexual gratification.
That is fascinating. Autoerotic asphyxiation, for those of you that don't know, autoerotic asphyxiation means you just strangle yourself during, you try to cut off the oxygen supply to your brain during climax. And sometimes it does not work out and they end up strangulating themselves, and it's it's one of those crazier kinks in my opinion, because it just one slip, one accident, and you're done. I watched a movie one time with Robin Williams, of all people. His son had hung himself, autoerotic asphyxiation, and Robin Williams's character was really ashamed. And I think it was Robin Williams. Now that I'm saying it, it's
I think it
I'm
was.
I'm yeah, and it's one of those things where you don't really think about another person's private time, and like I never had to worry about those things until I saw that movie, and then I'm like, I'm gonna go check on the kids.
Yep. I will tell you, you made a statement that autoerotic is one of the weirdest or most extreme kinks you've heard of. After you read this book, it'll
Yeah,
be
I got
way.
to read the book. I got
Yeah,
to read the book, Doug.
although it's extreme autoerotic, it's going to be nothing once you read this book on the kinks and fetishes and paraphilias that I document that humans do. Autoerotic is going to be on the lower spectrum of deviancy once you read this.
Yeah, I actually have a copy of the book. I believe you sent me a Kindle copy of the book, and I haven't had a chance to read it yet because I'm right in the middle of a book called Imminent by Lou Elizondo. It's about UFOs and stuff. But I went ahead and ordered a hard copy so that I could add it to my collection because I'm gonna rearrange the studio here this month. We're gonna kind of change it a little bit, and I want to put it on a bookshelf of some of the people that I've talked to over my career. And I've gotten just in the few short months that I've been doing this, I've gotten gifts from my audience members, gifts from guests that have come in. So I'm gonna, display those. I bought a hard copy so I can put it up on the shelf. But I'm so excited to get into it and dig in and read the book. I have a feeling it's one of those books where you crack it open and you can't stop because it's that entertaining and not entertaining in a good way, but not in a bad way either. You just have to find out what's on the next page. And I've read many books like that, and you kind of know them when you see them that, oh yeah, this is going to be a good one, which is actually why they write on the backside of the book, right?
Yep.
So reading all, I'm like, man, I got to read this book. But it's next in line, Doug. I can't wait. I'm very, very excited about that. But to get into um, a more personal side of your career, a lot of people want to find out about, cases that you've done or what's the most exciting thing you've ever done as a law enforcement officer. I've not really, I know what law enforcement officers go through. I know what cases you come across. Obviously, I'm a true crime fan, or I I but I always wonder, what do cops talk about when they're together? Not around us normal folks, but when law enforcement are hanging out with each other, what do you guys talk about?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if it's not your favorite burger joint or your fantasy football team, how that's doing, again, this is going to sound strange, but cops go immediately to the sexual deviant cases that fascinate them, and we share them. I document a case in Seattle, Washington. As a negotiator, I flew down to Washington for some training with other departments, and we are at a bar at night. And typically, the round table, it goes on the most extreme case you've ever worked. They ultimately all go to the sexual deviancy cases. And the one officer there had a case that shocked me that happened there. It's included in the book. But really, cops talk about the strangest stuff that happens behind closed doors because it fascinates us too. And again, it's not that the regular crimes aren't cool. They are. It's great arresting somebody that robs a bank. Love it. But really, that's not shocking mentally to cops because we deal with that all the time. It is shocking to cops when some of the things people do to themselves, whether they die or not, and then we become involved. So really, it goes straight to that every time. And it's almost like gamesmanship on who has the most extreme sexually deviant case, and we kind of pick a winner at each round table. But I always remember those discussions, and somehow they could start off very, you know, not in that realm, and they always go there every time.
So everybody wants to know these things. Why not write a book about it? You had six publishers pass you up on a book that could have changed, but it could have made them a shit ton of money.
It could
Like,
have.
and I would
I
have,
get it.
I
Yeah,
go ahead.
it's extreme, so I understand it. And I wouldn't say that they shut me down immediately. These were long thought processes from them, from their higher ups to phone calls to Zoom calls with me. And can I take most of this out? Well, and I explained to him the problem with taking most of it out is now it's not true to the reader. Like this is hardcore savage, and that's what it is. So I walk the reader through these crimes, very explicit, exactly what I saw. So that taking half of it out, I wouldn't be true to my readers, and I knew I'd find a publisher eventually, so I left it in. And the response has been overwhelming. Uh, if you go to Amazon, look at the reviews. Hopefully they keep up, but very positive. Like you said, people start the book and they don't stop. You read it all the way through. And the book's not all mentally taxing. What I did in the seventh and last chapter, that chapter is called Teachable Tidbits. And what I do for the readers, I take some, I call it naughty nuggets that I learned in my police career on calls on things that are legal and won't kill you that I didn't know people did with sex. I put that in the chapter. Now, whether your readers want to incorporate that into their sex lives or not, that's up to them. But it's a fun ending chapter. Again, all real cases, but things that you could actually add into your own sex life. That's not going to kill you, so the end of it kind of brings you down a little bit because the rest is pretty mentally taxing.
Man, I dig that. I really, really dig that. That you knew what you wanted and you were like, I'm going after this. Like, guys, if I take out half of the content, then I'm minus a book, you know? It's not the same book without all the stuff in it, you know? I I really dig that because here on Coffee with Bearded Bad Dad, I like to I like to be authentic. I like to be myself because I mean, if not myself, who else can I be? And I often find the people that are hiding who they truly are, you never really kind of get a read on them. And my favorite people that I've ever, interacted with or like watched a podcast or watched a television show, a lot of my favorites are real genuine people. And I think that I'm almost 100% against censorship. I really honestly believe the only way to combat a bad idea is with good ideas. And I don't think we should silence anybody. And that's how honestly we can prevent further crimes like the ones in the book by having the book, by making people aware, hey, this shit happens. Like, you got to watch yourself. The guy, the snake over there, he might shove it up your butt.
Yeah.
you know, like it's one of those things you gotta have dialogue. You gotta let people say what they want to say. And I really, really dig the fact that you would not let your book go out without being the whole book. I really appreciate that, man.
Yeah, well, I think you'll like the read. It does have some cop, I call it cop dark humor in there. And police officers use humor to kind of self-medicate therapy for ourselves. So I do splash that throughout the book, here and there. The readers thus far have really appreciated it. But it gives a cop's perspective on what we think, how we feel, some of the questions you've asked. So I kind of lead you all the way through it from my perspective. It's a fun read. I'm going to challenge the reader on some of the cases to be interactive, which is kind of cool. They've really liked that so far. And again, I think that true crime fans, I know you love serial killers and all that, but read this book because it's so different, all real. But again, it's just going to be focused purely on that sexual deviancy.
So speaking of sexual deviancy, I like again, I don't want to give too much away in the book, so be mindful of that. But weird insertions. Did you ever come across any like weird insertions? Like, because I was reading a book one time. It was a picture book, a coffee table book of X-rays, emergency room X-rays of weird insertions. And there was a light bulb in one of them. You ever come across anything like that?
I wish I hadn't. I've come across not only that, everything. Your first chapter on Name That Crime, you're going to get a 14-inch cucumber. You're going to get a photograph of it, and you get to decide what the crime was. So you're going to start off with a bang in my book.
Oh, wow. Wow. Really starting off with a bang. And one more thing, as you were kind of talking about, so the police officers talk about their shocking the shocking crimes when they're around each other. I one time, my brother-in-law is a former police officer in Memphis, and I asked him one time, I was like, I asked him the same question I asked you. I'm like, man, I'm not really interested. I know what cops go through. I know most of the job is really boring, actually, but I want to know, what do cops talk about when they're with each other? And he's like, man, honestly, it's about the most mundane shit and like the wildest cases maybe that we've gone through. But he's like, mostly it's like the funny stuff that happens while we're on the job. Oh man, listen to this. I was just on this bust over here. I had to take a shit so bad. I ran over there and I shit my pants, man. Full uniform, shit my pants. And those are the type of stories that I really enjoy hearing. And it's wild to hear that police officers often share their most shocking deviant crimes like that. And because I figure after you seeing that and being around that all day, you might not want to talk about it. But again, like that's the book. Nobody talks about it, right? Like nobody, people like me don't know the really like the 14-inch cucumber, like being in the first chapter. That's shocking. That I've that's wild to think about. Like 14 inches, like that's like that long. It's
Yeah, and the
crazy.
your readers get the girth on this thing is unbelievable. I didn't In this case, you'll read the story. I didn't think it was humanly possible, to be honest with you. I actually had the cucumber not in hand because I'm not touching that thing after, but it was incredibly large, the largest cucumber I've ever seen in my life. So those are the type of stories because it has a little humor in it, right? That cops they like it and they laugh their ass off. Another reason is because some of these real deviant cases were some of the people in society that were business leaders, that were politicians, that we wouldn't think would ever engage in this type of behavior. And cops really found that fascinating when, when those individuals committed these type of crimes and we got to go there because on the one side, they were everyday normal people, families, uh, you know, in society, everybody loved them. Lo and behold, behind closed doors. So I do tell read after you read this book, you're never going to look at your neighbor the same way. You're going to wonder what your coworkers do behind closed doors. You just will. It's because everybody does this, engages in it. Where you think it's just, really weird people. No, this is mainstream and it happens everywhere in the US, everywhere in the world.
Yeah, it's there comes a point where I think what really plays into this deviancy is addictive behavior. That's number one. And then just not being satisfied, things getting boring. Oh, I've done this. Now I've got to move up to the next thing. And it's freaking crazy. That's wild to think about, man.
I've never been
So
that to take a 14-inch cucumber up my ass. I know that.
right, right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I've never even wanted to. And I'm probably not going to look at cucumbers the same for the next, at least for the next month. It's so. Um, Other than the sexual deviant crimes that are negative, did you ever come across anybody who was unashamed or had a sense of humor about it, or wasn't embarrassed or any? Did you ever come across any of that?
Oh yeah, all the time. And one of them in Teachable Tidbits, I call him Andrew the Oracle. And what this case is unique. It was a domestic violence. Andrew had a life partner. He was gay. And typically on domestic violence, police officers like to separate the individuals. Husband, wife, partners, doesn't matter. Because what happens when you're drinking, getting violent, somebody's going to get hit or injured, and we have to take them to jail. If we can separate them, it's beautiful because nobody goes to jail. We don't have to write a report, live to fight another day. So I responded to this call, and Andrew answered the door. He was engaged in a verbal fight with his boyfriend. We went in there, two cops. We separated them. There was no domestic violence. We were good. So I asked Andrew if he would leave. So usually we get the customary phrase, go fuck yourself. It's my house. I'm not leaving. Andrew was pretty cool. He said, yep, I'll leave for the night. His boyfriend was cheating on him. So he hated him. He didn't want to be with him anymore. He was breaking up. And then what we do a civil standby where we follow them around. They gather some of their belongings, you know, toothbrush, all that stuff, so they can stay somewhere else. And we follow them around that way they can't grab a gun or something like that. And we escort him out. Well, he went into the bathroom. I followed him. He grabbed his toothbrush, a hairbrush, some toiletries. Then he went into his bedroom. He had a large green duffel bag. Pulled open the bottom drawer, got some t-shirts, underwear, no big deal. Pulled open the top drawer, and he had Hall's cough drops stacked side to side in this drawer. I mean, just filled. And he started grabbing them and putting them in this bag, all of them. So I asked him sarcastically as a cop, do you have a bad cough or something? Because I mean, what the hell are you taking that many cough drops for? And you're just leaving for the night. So he looked at me like I was an idiot and said, you don't know what these are for. And I said, no. And he said, you pop one in and you give a blowjob and it heats up the shaft of the penis and it makes your orgasm incredible. So I was a little shocked as a cop, and I'm not supposed to talk about getting blowjobs on duty. So I wanted to stay away from this. So I tried to ignore him, and he said, "You don't like blowjobs?" So again, I didn't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. He saw that I had a ring on my finger, and so he said, "Your wife doesn't like giving you blowjobs." And so this was a bizarre world. Uh, but what happened is Andrew took all the cough drops. He left, and he looked at me and said, "I had a prophecy. You're going to enjoy it." And I was like, "A prophecy about what?" He said, "The cough drops." And I said, "Oh, I'm good, but thank you." Like my partner, my coworker, picked up on this because he was with the other guy. He came out and he said, what prophecy?" And I said, "Okay, dude, there's no prophecy. The guy said you put the cough drop in, when you get up a blowjob, it heats up the shaft, better orgasm." He's like, "Does it work?" And I was like, "How the hell am I supposed to know?" But what I did is I called my wife because wives love the stranger part of police work too. And I always call her with, "You're not going to believe this one. Could be a murder, it could be this, but this time it was a cough drop." So she said, "That's probably a good idea. I think that cough drops would work." So, I tell my readers in the book, I was full speed ahead to the local drugstore to get some cough drops. Uh,
Dude, as you're telling me this, as you first started telling the story, I'm in my head. I'm like, maybe I got to get some
exactly.
cough drops.
I think a lot of people post this are going to get some cough drops, but what it did, it as odd as it sounds, it kind of went viral in the police department, and I was getting calls from other officers on if this works, is it really good? Should they try it? I was like, I'm not like the resident expert on putting a cough drop and getting blowjobs, but it was funny how popular this became. So I always remember Andrew because he was unabashedly explicit about doing this. I don't know where he went, but I thank them on behalf of the police department because they all tried it. And I'm guessing if this book becomes more popular, cough drop companies are going to sell a lot more cough drops. So that was one where it's a funny story, but it's one of those teachable tidbits where your listeners can incorporate it or not. It's up to them.
Right. That's so funny. That's hilarious. I'm glad you told me that one. That's great. And like literally as you're telling me this, like the wheels are turning in my head as you're telling me this. I was going to tell you anyway, but then you were like you added onto the story and I was like, "See, everybody was thinking it. I'm not weird." That's incredible. Well, Doug, this has been a fantastic conversation, man. I appreciate your time, and I'm gonna let you get out of here. But first, man, I'm gonna have to ask you what was your favorite thing about being a police officer?
I I think my favorite thing was again the job always changes. You're deep in your community. So Anchorage, even though you have 300,000 residents, I felt like I knew all 300,000 of them after working 25 years. And being a good community member, you get to help a lot. So it's not we talked about a lot of the bad stuff, but there's a lot of good stuff in law enforcement where you help people, not necessarily in crimes, but just in times of need. That was the most rewarding. I mean, we would talk at schools, we'd interact with kids, really important stuff for our profession, right? To be on the positive side of it. Always enjoyed that. I would do it over again. I mean, when the calls come in, you have to handle the cases, but really that's the sweet spot when you're interacting with your communities, whether it's community council speaking, citizens academies, those type of things. I always enjoyed it because you could tell them the positives about being a police officer and it wasn't just the negative. So I always wanted to be a champion for cops. There are some bad cops, of course, like every profession, but the vast majority are good. They do their jobs. They work really hard to protect society.
And what's your least favorite thing?
Probably the long hours, to be honest with you. Being on specialty teams, you could literally go out for 48 hours and I would feel like a zombie. I mean, your mind starts not working. You're trying to focus. So really the long hours of law enforcement, and it can be taxing on your family. So you really have to focus on setting aside family time and work time. So that was the least favorite is the lack of sleep. But again, that's by necessity and not much you can do about that.
And now that you've written a book, what is your favorite thing about being an author?
I think you can express yourself. You can have your style of writing. You can incorporate just the right amount of humor to kind of lead readers along so it's not so serious. So I think that's really, there's a fine line there that you have to toe. So I think the responses have been very positive. That's the most rewarding, where you as a reader enjoy the book. I want you to enjoy it. It wasn't a money-making venture. It wasn't about anything else. I want the reader to take this book and be like, wow, that was a solid book. I enjoyed it. And like you said, it might keep you a little bit safer in society because you got to be careful, right? Cops can't always protect you. You got to protect yourself sometimes. So this might widen the eyes of individuals to, checks and balances on where you might go, what situations you might put yourself in. So I think that's a positive of the book. But again, I think it's going to be a read. I think it'll take you out of, everyday life. It'll give you a break. You'll really enjoy it. Kind of entertainment, I think is what it is.
Awesome. And I won't ask you your least favorite thing about being an author because my next question is you got any other projects you're working on?
Yeah, there'll be a couple other books. Like I said, I have a lot of hardcore interactions with serial killers. So there may be an Alaskan serial killer book. The
Hell
50,
yes, that's the one I want to read too because as excited as I am about this book, I can understand people a little bit more because so not every not every serial killer is going to murder. To be honest with you, there's a lot of people out there that think about doing it, but they don't actually do it. And it is really helpful for me to help like dive into the mental aspect of these things. And you don't often get a whole lot of that in books. Like you don't really, there's of course the true stories out there. We get the stories, we get the case notes, but we don't often hear the deep down details of the especially those with childhood traumas. We don't really hear those side of the stories, so we don't really hear, in my opinion, anyway. Because I haven't actually read that many true crime books. More of a different kind of media, but in my opinion, we don't really dive much into the psychology aspect of serial killers and why they start in the first place. And there's always that classic question of nature versus nurture. Are serial killers born serial killers, or is it are serial killers made? And that's a question that's still not been answered yet. So I'm
yep.
very interested in those kind of questions.
No, and I'll bring a perspective on those serial killers that readers have never seen before. There's a lot of books on serial killers. I'll give you our interrogation techniques, pre-interview, post, some of the things that were said. I have a lot of audio and for a print version, text that I'll put in there that has never been heard before. Some really deep conversations and to show how sick and perverse some of these individuals are. I mean, this is hardcore stuff. So that'll be a later project. I wanted to come out with a bang with 50 Shades of True Crime, kind of separate myself as a true crime author, and then we'll get into more traditional after that. I do have a website, dougfifer.com, and that's just fifer.com. Readers can sign up there and they'll be noticed on additional books that come out. You can also watch the book trailer on my website, Pretty Savage. I think they'll like it. And then a lot of other information, especially book signings. I focused in Alaska on a lot of book signings, did very well. With the publisher, I'll be doing a US tour for book signings. So get up to date on that. And if I'm in your area, please come see me. Love to sign you a book and talk more about it.
Awesome, man. Doug Fifer, 50 Shades of True Crime, Sex, Drugs, and Killer Kink. Man, I can't wait to get into and dig into this book and get it finished. I'm going to reach out to you and let you know what I think of it. And then I'm also, would you mind reaching out to me when you get another project coming?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, easy.
Awesome. Awesome, Doug. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time, buddy.
All right, Ricky. Thank you.